Hi, welcome to this management case study question debrief session. My name is Iryna McDonald, and I'm going to be your presenter for today. So let's find out what we're trying to achieve in this session. There are three things that will be the main focus of our attention. In order for us to do well in the exam, we need to make sure we understand what exam is after. And therefore, we need to spend a little bit of time interpreting question requirements so we know exactly what examiner is expecting. We'll also need to think about the percentage breakdown that examiner gives to us, because there is a link between time and mark allocation in the exam. The more time a question or a subtask is given, the higher is the quantity of marks that are allocated to it. And finally, we will need to think about what makes for a well-structured answer. How do we get our points across in a way that earns those precious exam marks? To be able to introduce ourselves to a question, we're going to use a past exam question. So what we're going to be focusing on is May to August 2020 exam. We remember that the same pre-scene about Alpaca Hotel Group was used for both May and August 2020 exam. For those of you that want to have a look at that paper, and I would advise that you pause this recording and have a look at the paper before you progress to listen to the rest of the debrief. I'll show you where would be the best place to locate the relevant information. If you want to find past exam papers, the easiest way of going about it is going to Google and into the search type in CIMA post-exam kits. On the first link that comes up, we have past paper exams and answers. If we click on this, do remember to then choose the management case study exam. And we will consider the May-August May-August paper. Particularly, we're going to be focusing on task 1 of variant 1. So you might want to quickly read through the pre-scene to familiarize yourself with Alpaca Hotel Group. You might also want to have a look in more detail at the task 1 of variant 1 of this exam, so you have a greater understanding of what the question is requiring you to do. Let's also have a brief overview of the pre-scene. So having read the information on CIMA website, I can reiterate the most important facts from the pre-scene, and I'll also show you the key highlights from the unseen task in the exam, so you have greater familiarity with what we've been asked to do. So the pre-scene is based on a company called Alpaca that runs a hotel chain, and those are the luxury upmarket hotels. Therefore, we will need to have appropriate quality of facilities and customer service to maintain the luxury brand. We also need to understand that operating in that luxury segment, we need to be responsive to our guest preferences. We will need to be accommodating, providing them the comfort and the service our premium customers expect. We also have mission objectives, clearly set out targets, particularly in terms of the growth of the organization. Our investors expect the company to grow in a way to generate them a greater return. And therefore, a new investment is likely to be necessary to facilitate that growth. So variant 1 on the paper, and we're going to be looking at task 1 of variant 1, is focused on the overseas investment in the holiday hotel. Your advice will be required on this issue. Let's now consider how we manage time in the exam. So most tasks in the exam are 45 minutes long. And therefore, it's likely to take you at least 10% of the time for reading and planning. So we're looking for around 5 minutes for you to familiarize yourself with the task, the unseen information provided in the exam, as well as to plan, gather your thoughts, and to think about how it is that this new information will help you to answer the question set. With remaining time after 5 minutes has been spent on reading and planning, the remaining time is split between subtasks based on the percentage given. So if you're told that a subtask deserves 60% of your time, it deserves 24 out of the remaining minutes. The subtask that deserves 40% of the time, therefore, needs to be allocated 16 minutes when it comes to writing out your answer. So what is it that we're looking for in a good answer? First thing we need to focus on is question requirements. It is worthwhile spending a few extra seconds to understand what exactly is the examiner requiring of me, because if you understand the examiner's requirements, you're much more likely to pitch your response at the right level. You're much more likely to focus on the key issues and therefore score high marks. Well-structured answers always help. It's easier for the markers to mark if the headings are there. They see what the key points are that you're addressing. It also helps you to focus on the key issues and explore them in sufficient depth. We need to make sure that by default, every argument that we make in our answer is applied to scenario context. In our case, if the scenario of Alpaca Hotel is given to us, everything we say has to relate to alpaca and hotel environment. We need to make sure that every point is fully explained. You can't just state an idea, you have to say why that idea is valid. And make sure you bear in mind the mark allocation. How many marks did the examiner make available for a particular requirement? And therefore, you provide the right quantity of points to be able to pass that requirement. Finally, time management. We know that 45 minutes are allocated per task, and once 45 minutes are up, the computer, the software in the exam will automatically move you on to the next task. So you cannot overspend on a particular task, but we need to make sure that we get the balance right between subtasks. That's why the percentage allocation is given to us. So we know that if a task is given 60%, it deserves more time and more attention from your side than the task that is only allocated 40%. So let's now quickly have a look at the task itself. So we have an understanding of what we've been asked to do. And again, you might decide to pause recording at this point, have a read through the tasks so you're fully familiar with the circumstances the examiner presented you with. If we have a look at the task itself, we'll be told that Alpaca Hotel Group is growing by acquiring another hotel in a foreign country. And there are further investments that might be necessary to bring the newly acquired hotel up to the standard. 2 projects are considered as a result. We could upgrade our swimming pool, or we could upgrade our gym. There are 2 requirements that are associated with this task. So the first requirement is given 60%, and the second requirement is given 40%. There is also reference material available for this task in terms of financial information provided for each of those investment projects, the pool and the gym. as well as some explanation of additional factors associated with each of those projects. Let's now focus on the question requirements in particular to make sure we understand what is it that the examiner is expecting and therefore could approach this question in the best possible way that maximizes our marks. So the first requirement is asking you to prepare the briefing note, and this briefing note should consider both financial and non-financial factors, giving us 60%. So when I'm planning this, I'm thinking of myself, how do I break down those question requirements to make sure I have understood each component of those requirements and therefore maximize the marks? Firstly, I'll note to myself that I'll need to do the briefing notes format to, from, date, subject. And if I'm asked about financial and non-financial factors, I'll initially think about what are the financial factors, remembering that the task provided me with a table containing financial information. I remember to fully discuss those factors and think about what is this information telling me about the viability of gym or the pool project. I will use evidence from both pre-seen material, what I already know about Alpaca Hotel, and unseen material, new information provided in the task to make my points. And I would expect to gain 6 to 8 marks for this component of the requirement. Similar approach will be adopted when we're going to think about non-financial factors. So what are the issues do I need to consider when it comes to gym or pool project? I'll need to fully discuss those factors using evidence from both pre-seen and unseen materials, and I would expect 6 to 7 marks for this component. So what we've learned that when we're looking at a task that has 60% allocated to it, we are looking for about 14, 15 marks available in that task. So as there are two components, financial and non-financial factors, that be roughly equally weighted, 6 to 8 for financials, 6 to 7 for non-financial factors. How would I approach answering such a question? So first thing, remember to introduce the briefing note format if examiner is asking you to provide this. So to, from, date, subject would be your standard format. Remember that in the exam, you never use your actual name. You are always the finance manager or financial manager. All the scripts should be anonymous to help markers to mark them more objectively. We also said that having great structure is helping you and the markers to make sure that your marks are maximized. And to create structure, I would use headings, for example, initial investment and PV and so on. Remember that when we look at the structure of the task in a table that's provided to us as part of reference material, we're told about initial investment and PV are the financial factors. So using information given in a task to structure your answer is always a good start. So with initial investment, I will need to grasp that Alpaca is experiencing capital rationing, as in there is not enough money to initiate all projects that the organization would like to initiate. So though there may be many projects with a positive NPV, we will need to decide how much funding we've got and therefore how many projects can be started. And those two projects will need different amounts of funding, either 20 or 40 million. Okay? But if funding constraints are severe, even if projects are overall financially viable, we may not be able to start any of those projects, or may be able to just do one depending on the extent of those funding constraints. And talking about viability of the project, so both projects have a positive NPV, and therefore both shareholder wealth are financially worthwhile for the company. But a higher NPV of the gym project is telling us that this project is favored because it will maximize shareholder wealth, will get a greater overall return if we initiate the gym project. Let's now look at other financial factors. The remaining three headings in the reference material given to us within the task is payback, IRR, and profitability index. So again, I'll be using them as part of my discussion. So we'll need to see that pool has a shorter payback period, and therefore, if pool pays back in a shorter time, it will boost overall company liquidity. We will have cash to reinvest in other projects. But overall, when we look at the difference between those two projects is marginal. It takes additional 5 months for gym project to generate equal cash flows. So the difference between the pool and the gym project payback period may not be the most significant factor in deciding which project to initiate. Moving on to internal rate of return. Okay? So both of those projects have a rate of return that's much higher than overall company's cost of capital of 10%. And therefore, we are not worried about us not being able to pay back the cost of capital. We know that even if our cost of capital increases, we will still find that those projects are financially worthwhile. So we do also remember that though IRR is helping us to understand which projects are viable, NPV overall is seen as a more superior appraisal technique. So NPV should be our guide in deciding which of the projects is the one we should go with if only one project turns out to be possible. Finally, profitability index. As a commercial entity, we strive to boost our profit as a way to boost shareholder wealth. So pool project has a higher profitability index of 0.37. However, we know that this will be a project in a foreign country. Exchange rates could dramatically influence our costs and revenues when translated into our home country currency, which makes it more difficult for us to assess the true profit that this project will generate. So what we have considered now is the first component of the first requirement. We have looked at the financial factors associated with those two projects. Let's now move on and have a look at non-financial factors. Again, introducing a subheading non-financial factors will make it easier for the examiner to understand that you're still answering the correct requirement. And as always, structure would help to focus your answer. So I've chosen the structure by talking about corporate objectives, customer satisfaction, as well as the reputation of the organization. You might decide to use different headings, but as long as we're covering similar points, we remember that in management case study exam, your argument will get marks as long as it's valid in context. It doesn't have to be exactly the same argument as you've seen on the screen. So if we compare those two projects, when we look at the pool, we're hoping that if we have a nice pool, it will help us to maintain current occupancy rates, as in the same number of guests will come to us. As a differentiator, luxury hotel, we are expected to provide high quality guest experience. So a good pool will enhance that atmosphere for the guests. However, if we decide to go forward with the gym, it will allow us to access additional revenue stream because non-residents, people that do not stay in our hotel, people that perhaps live in a local area, might decide to come and visit the gym. There is currently limited competition, very few gyms in the local area, so it's a chance for us to gain extra income. Considering the overall customer satisfaction, we remember that quality is important for us at the brand, and this quality could boost reputation of the company as a whole. If our guests have a good experience, we'll be more highly ranked in social media channels, for example, on Visit Advisor, and that could attract more customers to that specific hotels or Alpaca as a whole, because its brand will be positively perceived. Okay? And this will further contribute towards investor expectations. They want revenue, they want profitability. So good reputation boosts revenue and profitability. Finally, looking at reputation more specifically, we need to think about how we will be perceived in that local area where refurbishment is taking place. Launch of new facilities is a great marketing opportunity to promote us to the people who live in that local area. And as a result, we might find it easier to recruit and retain staff. Alpaca will be seen as a company that's willing to invest in the hotel, which makes it a more attractive place for staff to work. Let's now also have a look at the first requirement from the marker's perspective. So in CIMA exam, markers will be given a grade like the one you're looking at that will help them to understand how many of the marks available should be awarded to a particular student for their answer. And as we said, there will be two components in that task that markers will be looking at: financial factors. For discussion of financial factors, you could get maximum of 6 to 8 marks. And depending on the depth to which you've been able to cover the points, certain number of marks will be allocated. So for example, if you just focus on the positive return, a positive NPV, only a limited number of marks, 1 to 2 marks, will be available to you. However, if you include a full discussion of relevant factors, you could increase your marks up to 5. Okay? Finally, the student that could provide a good justification as to why a particular method, for example, NPV, is superior to other methods, such as payback, such as IRR, will be able to gain the maximum 8 marks available. Similarly, with non-financial factors, maximum 6 to 7 marks can be awarded. So if we just describe the relevance of non-financial factors, only a few marks are available to us. For a discussion, we could increase the marks available to 5. And finally, a good justification would raise the bar to 7 marks. Let's now move on and consider the second component of the requirements. So secondly, you've been asked using the figures just for the gym project, not the pool project. And using those figures, you need to explain why sensitivity analysis would be useful. You also asked to talk about whether sensitivity analysis would be better than scenario planning when evaluating that gym project. So only gym project is the one that to be talked about in that requirement. As always, we need to see what are the components of the requirements that we need to address. So firstly, we need to ask ourselves, what is it that we're discussing? The usefulness of sensitivity analysis. What is the purpose of the technique? And of course, all of our arguments need to be made in context applied to the gym project and Alpaca in general. So we're making references to both pre-scene information, what we know about alpaca, and unseen information, what we're told about gym project in the reference material of the task. So 4 to 5 marks are available for the usefulness of sensitivity analysis. The next component will ask us to consider similarities and differences between sensitivity analysis and scenario planning. And again, we need to use references to both pre-seen alpaca and unseen materials, information about the gym project. So further 4 to 5 marks are available here. So what it tells us that when we're looking at a subtask with 40% allocated to it, we know that in the exam that equals to 10 marks. As always, if a subtask has several requirements, so we start with the assumption of equal allocation, usefulness of sensitivity analysis will be given roughly the same quantity of marks as similarities and differences between sensitivity analysis and scenario planning. Let's now look at how we could approach our answer. Let's start by considering the issues to do with sensitivity analysis. So we need to say, what is this technique all about? How is it useful in decision making? And it helps us to understand the effects of changing cash flows, what impact it will have on NPV. We know that our cash flows comprises many variables, revenues and costs, so changing one variable could have an impact on the overall viability of the project. We know that when we are estimating how our project is likely to turn out in future, not all of those estimates are completely certain. There will be some degree of uncertainty about occupancy rates, about gym membership take-up, so that could impact on the viability of investment, telling us that not everything about our gym may work out in a way that we expect it to be. And in a way, we've already done a little bit of sensitivity in our discussion of financials, because internal rate of return helps us to consider sensitivity of projects to the change in the cost of capital. We know that if our cost of capital rises to 19.3%, gym project is no longer financially viable. That's what IRR is telling us. But we could also, through sensitivity analysis, understand what those key variables might be that help us to manage risks associated with the gym project. For example, what if gym membership doesn't grow quite as quickly as we expected? What could we put in place to safeguard ourselves against such risks? So one of the safeguards could be a marketing campaign to promote our new gym facilities to the locals to ensure high take-up of the membership. We also need to consider other factors that might be incorporated in our assumptions. For example, the prices. How much do we want to charge for the yearly membership or the monthly membership? And to make sure that our gym is successful, we will need to understand how sensitive the project NPV is to a particular membership price that we are thinking of charging. Continuing with the other components of the subtask, as you see, I'm still using headings, scenario planning, comparison, to help me make sure that I focus on the question requirements, address them fully. So when talking about scenario planning, I need to explain what the concept means. So we think about the future possibilities that might arise and the effect those have on the project. Some of those future possibilities could be adverse. In the task, we're told that a planning permission might be granted for a health club that will become a direct competitor with the gym. So we need to think about how that might impact on our project, what scenarios, a range of factors might change in the future, and whether our project will still be viable in those new circumstances. So several assumptions could change as a result. Our membership growth could change as a result, our prices, and even our costs. So if we want to consider all of those factors at once, scenario planning is a technique that looks at the whole new scenario with a whole new range of factors and helps us to create an NPV of the project for that new range of factors. So finally, if we compare those techniques, we see that sensitivity analysis allows us to only consider one variable at a time, whereas with scenario planning, we could consider several variables. However, both techniques will help us to deal with uncertainty. Those are complementary, and therefore our management team could benefit from using both of those techniques to assess whether the GM project is the right one for the company in the future. Let's also have a look at the subtask from perspective of the markers. So the following marking guide would have been available for that sitting to the marketing team. And as we see, again, there are two components to the subtasks. The first component is the usefulness of sensitivity analysis. Maximum 4 to 5 marks are available for it. So just describing the use of sensitivity analysis will give us minimum marks, 1 mark. If we're able to provide an explanation or justification for our ideas, then marks are increased. And second component of the subtask is about comparison between the two techniques, scenario planning and sensitivity analysis. Again, 4 to 5 marks are available here. So describing scenario planning is just a start. We need to provide comparison and justification for the similarities and differences between those techniques. So as the final point, I just want to emphasize to you what are the key things you need to focus on in creating your answers in the future when you're attempting the management case study exam. A good start would be to have a solid knowledge base. You need to be familiar with what techniques such as NPV, RR, payback are useful for, but you need to tailor your answer to the question set. Just stating the knowledge is not enough to gain pass marks in the exam. It's always worthwhile planning your answer, for example, by thinking about the components of each of the subtasks and the number of marks available in each component. We need to make sure that all of our answers are grounded in a scenario. They're applied to context. Everything we say in our answer is directly related to the gym or the pool project, is directly related to Alpaca Hotels requirements. And finally, managing the time. 45 minutes to attempt the task is not that long at all. So we need to make sure we manage our time wisely and we move on between two subtasks, giving each of those tasks the amount of attention they deserve. So I do very much hope you enjoyed this session. Thank you very much for listening to me. My name is Iryna McDonald, and I do very much hope that one day we'll be able to meet in either physical or virtual classroom where we could take our discussion of management case study further. Lots of luck in your exam, guys.